All right. Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the May 10th, 2021 meeting of the short-term rental ordinance work group. Chris Peterson, today, Jackie Bados, Ron, Tom, Mike, Liz, and Bruce all on board. Thank you guys for showing up this morning. Go in sort of a little bit of reverse order here. I think can I do that? Yeah, it's a special meeting. Any comments? Seeing as I like to think about picking up where we left off, which is to a certain point also the minutes, because it has content. Any comments on the minutes that are out there relative to what we captured?
I'm happy with a few changes that I think Tom made for us after the last meeting. We had shuffled some things around, so I'm pretty happy with those. Okay, so
we'll do the approval at the end. I just want to make sure the comments lead into, because it sort of links, I think, sometimes into the evolving working document. Okay, so appreciate. We'll approve them in order at the end. Tom, do you want to kick us off with just a little as you do, always a little high level where we left off and where we should pick up?
Yeah, so one of the new additions was in section 4A, letter D. It was Henry talked about the needing of the affidavit signed when you kind of first get the rental permit to kind of allow for safety inspections if nature kind of might come up. So that was added in. And then we were still talking about the limit to amount of rentals in section C. So that was kind of added of like one rental permit per property. And that kind of gave us, that way someone couldn't rent out the accessory dwelling unit plus the house to a different person. And then that kind of leads us right into starting section 5 of the expiration and renewal process, and then eventually section 7 of the general standards.
Can I ask a question about this section 4? I'm sorry, I had technical problems last time and couldn't be here, but something just came up this weekend a few miles from where I used to live in LA, where we had short-term rental issues. Maybe you heard about it, made national news, where a short-term rental was rented with a maximum allowing of 6 people on the beach. And there was something like 20 some odd people on the deck of the house, and neighbors alerted the owner, who was doing a short-term rental, of these people, and she tried to call them over 3 hours to get them to leave. Ended with the deck collapsing onto rocks below, and several people injured at least. So my thought was, do we have anything in the safety code that if we saw an egregious violation like this, somebody could immediately shut it down?
Well, so if the question is, Liz, you're saying if during the rental they've broken one of the guidelines and rules that are set out in this document, can they essentially remove going so far as to remove the renters from the property during that period of time? Is that what you're?
Yeah, or bring it back to whatever the agreed upon number of people in the rental is. If you say a similar situation, neighbor in West Simsbury can look over and see there's a deck with 50 people on it.
I think this is where we tried to cover it. I'm not saying we did, but where we asked for, if not the owner, we asked for the contact information for the person who is local. So that's one thing we did. Tom's nodding. And then obviously, to go to town officials for the safety compliance. Go ahead, Mike.
You also put a prohibition in here for having events or parties.
Yeah.
Remember, we hit that. So I think that solves that one.
But I think what Liz is saying, Liz, what you're saying is we have those prohibitions. We have the contact. If the person's not there, then there has to be the backup contact to whatever. And then we obviously we have your parking ordinance. I mean, you've got your 6 people. You've got your noise, you've got all those things. I think what she's saying is, if a person in the moment is violating those, can somebody take action during that event to remove those people or rectify it? Is that Liz, that your question?
Yeah, I'm just saying immediate emergency seems to be at hand, or possible threat to safety. It's great we have it on paper, but say, I don't know how you have it set up to enforce it. So if it's a weekend, is it somebody at town hall? Well, it's a weekend, and most of the stuff might happen on a weekend. You know,
Liz, we have wording that actually says Director of Planning, Community Development, or his or her designee. So, Mike, there might be a way for you to kind of work with like designating like the chief of police, who then designates all the police officers as a way of enacting, like, to enforce the authority to immediately suspend a short-term rental permit if a safety violation is present.
Yeah,
and does exceeding the capacity? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just thinking, I put some thought into this local person, and I was thinking it should maybe be defined as like an owner's agent up front, and that person has the authority to act as if the owner, whether it has to be hire a plumber because the toilet's backed up, or in your case, terminate the renter's ability to use the facility if they're going beyond what their rental agreement has. I've just thought there might be a better way to address it, because it's been a couple times. And it doesn't.
Ron, that's interesting. Jackie, maybe we're going too far with this, but I know we're trying to get. I had the exact something along the same thought, Ron, is that if the owner is absent, and all we're asking for is a contact person.
Right. They have no authority.
You could put down Chris Peterson, who I'm going to sit there and go, you want me to fix your toilet? What do you want me to say? But maybe in the absence of the owner, we got a little heavier and we say you need to, the contact person must be someone of a professional in that space, a property management firm, something like along the lines. Because then the property management firm can also maybe be, certainly the liaison in an instance where a property management firm deals with violations all day long. I mean, I'm sure, at least the ones I've dealt with, and that may get closer to what Liz is concerned as well, is how to either de-escalate something or how to escalate something into the proper. And I think that requirement level, that kind of requirement would put a little more meat into how what we're requiring of the level of care and structure around these short-term rentals in our town. And I think that would. So does anybody else have any thoughts? I mean, I'll stop talking. Anybody?
Well, I don't see how that's going to immediately take care of the acute situation of neighbor sees deck, is concerned it's about to collapse. If there's a professional property manager,
you can see that with an owner doing the same thing. I mean,
right.
Going to have the same thing. So I think what you were talking about earlier, if it has to be the police or something, and then there's going to be some responsibility, I suppose, on the property owner. Who knows? Maybe the deck can hold 110 people, and he's got 60 out there, and you're going to throw him off. Who's making that decision?
Well, like Chris said, we don't allow events, so that would be up to the town planner or whoever they designate, if that's police, to say we don't allow events. Okay.
Yeah, I know. That's I marked that as not defined as well, so I'm not quite sure what that means.
However it falls under because the neighbor knows that the rental agreement is only for 6 people. Then they know that there's too many people on the deck. That may also fall under it's an event because there's too many people and they're partying, and that's an event. But all I'm saying is, there anybody who can immediately enforce the situation? That's really my.
I think the police are probably the only ones that I can think of.
So what happens is that if the owner is there, the owner gets a phone call and says, "You've got 10 people on that deck you're renting. You are in violation of your permit. We're going to call the police, or the police are going to be called." That person either takes action to correct it or they don't, and then the police get called. Okay, then that's why I'm saying I think we also should put this to. We don't want absentee landlords at all, of any type at all, and that's why I'm thinking in that event. Are you going to call the person's cousin who doesn't really? Is that person going to run over there and confront a group of 10 people? Probably not. But I mean, again, if we actually required the contact person to be a professional property management, that kind of entity is is, on a daily basis deals with property infractions and behavior. And that would also, I think, it would lessen the it would put more responsibility around people who want to do short-term rentals to do this in a professional way, so that the neighbor who doesn't feel safe because there's 20 kids partying on a thing has somebody who they can call and address this with, versus just my friend who happens to be my contact. I wrote down their name and cell phone number and didn't give any thought to what really their job is.
I guess you're trying to define in this ordinance what this professional organization would be and all the requirements on it. I don't know if you can do that here. As far as I know, there isn't a organization of professional property managers that someone could say, this is who I can use. I think it's important that the person that they designate have the authority. That's what
I wonder if we're talking about it.
Wording, like on the form when they designate a local contact, like maybe that local contact has to come in with them when they apply for the permit, so that local contact can kind of read some language that says like you're the person in charge, like it kind of falls on you to enforce this. And that way, when they sign it, they know what they're signing up for. It being the local contact.
Any potential, immediate infractions visualized or identified. You're going to be held, not responsible, but you're going to be the first, contact point to rectify it. And then if that doesn't work, then it'll move to the appropriate town body of authority.
Well, I think going back to the point made earlier, that what these neighbors are looking for is, well, you have to go back to that experience over on Old Farms Road. The police came to the house,
right,
and they said to the neighbors who were so upset at the obvious problems that they had no authority and they couldn't do anything about it. They were willing to come and look on, I guess. I'm not sure, I wasn't there, but they said they couldn't do anything. So if we're writing something, we need to make sure the town attorney or somebody tells us that we've created language that would preclude the police saying, we have no authority here, we can't do anything. So maybe we need to ask the chief, maybe we need to ask the town attorney. I don't know.
Well, we have a little bit of that. I mean, if this ordinance existed 3 years ago and the police showed up, I think the police would be able to say, you're in violation of the short-term rental ordinance because you have X cars, they're parked in Y area, you have Z number of people, and you've clearly congregated an event, which is, it doesn't matter if it's word of mouth or not, by contacting more than 6 people, you created events. I mean, I think they then would have been able to say, please disperse or rectify. So that's the intent here. I would hope, Bruce.
Right. I think we got the spirit of it. I'm not sure if we have enough of the exact language and content that we need, but
well, if we can get through it, that's what we can do. You're absolutely right, Bruce. We can have Mike, talk to the police, the attorney, whoever we need to make sure that this is a working document before we do our final approval.
Of course. Yeah. We'll put this in front of Bob. We'll put this in front of Chief Bolter, because Chief Bolter often states, we've talked to him, because he doesn't want his people to not be empowered. He doesn't want his people to be, he doesn't want to just simply be a symbol. But there's often, he wants his people to have both the opportunity of what they represent to be enough, but also if that's just not enough, to have something that they can take action on. And that's what we're here for. And then of course we'll bring them, I think, for sure into the loop. So, all right, Tom, maybe you could put, so we'll put a note there. It would have gone to Bob D for review. It would have had to have gone, but we can formally say that we know we're going to have to town attorney, but also add in that the chief of police will review. Bruce's point, but well taken. And then maybe something around, because I won't go as far as my idea. I just like, I just think putting something formal in there like that, requiring a formal agency, really puts elevates their level of responsibility or their level of sincerity of taking, of being concerned with their property. But we could hold that, but maybe we do, Tom, have something where the checklist, that whoever the contact is, if the contact doesn't have to be present, the contact also has to sign an acknowledgement form that say they, as well as my designee and my contact, I have read the short-term ordinance. I understand the requirements of it, and I understand what my role would be potentially in here, something like that. And
I agree, because I did this role in LA. I had a personal concierge service, so I did essentially the property management role for, if they needed anything, towels, had problems with plumbing, I did it, but I wasn't a professional property management company. So I don't see why it couldn't be a responsible entity or a person who would do it. But my point of even starting down this path was the owner was aware, was trying to make contact, according to the news story, maybe wasn't right there, but was calling them. The neighbors were aware. Everybody 100% knew there was a problem. No one was able to go in there and stop the tragedy they could see was going to probably happen. And so I think I've made my point that do we have the teeth to do that here?
I think the answer is we want to, but have we accomplished that at this point? I think
we'll leave that up to the first cut from the professional. So to give us with the context, like Bruce's point, do you believe this has enough teeth for you? Perhaps think of that question. Okay, so can we move to? I think that's a good point, though, Liz. I can remember a party I was at in high school here in town where a deck collapsed and somebody was injured for tragically or for life.
Well, yeah, and it doesn't mean every deck's going to collapse. I guess my analogy, is the owner and the neighbor know whatever the problem is, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They're on the roof and the tiles are loose. Whatever they know the problem is, they know there's a problem, and then still can't do anything.
Okay, so we are up to. Sorry, going back. And Tom, where?
I think now we can start section 5, the expiration and renewal process of the permit.
Okay. And I think, remember, I asked that moving forward, this part of the ordinance should follow as much form as our other permitting and processes for anything else, so that we're not so out of scope. I don't have a lot of comment here. Anybody else have a great deal of comment to run? Obviously, excuse me, I say obviously, a person who's the intent is a person who is in violation from their previous year or experience is either to, is to renew them under certain conditions. So I don't know if we can add that in there, but the renewal process should be fairly standard. Does anybody have any comments?
I know at one point we had mentioned it making it 2 years. I'm just thinking I think Mike might have brought it up. These things tend to snowball as you get more and more types of ordinances or things requiring permitting. And I don't know what you would lose with having 24 months as a period versus 12, other than the time it's going to take for the zoning department to authorize these.
Yeah, I mentioned at our last meeting that 2 years was the timeline that's in the draft state piece of legislation that it seems like isn't going to go forward, but they wrote it and it was distributed to all of us. But they used 2 years. I think the feedback when we talked about this at our last gathering was that it seemed like there was a sense of shorter is better to monitor compliance, as a function of monitoring compliance. And I'm not sure I'm 100% enthusiastic about 12 months, but we should have a timeline. My personal opinion is it feels like 2 years is probably sufficient, because the permit holder has to, there's a fee involved. And so for $100 and something every year or $100 and something every 2 years, you know, I'm not sure we get a lot more compliance with a 12-month cycle. My thought was partly the burden it places on the staff to be dealing with this process over and over and twice as often as they might otherwise.
That was
Yeah. So I guess if it was up to me, we did it all my way. I'd put 2 years in and see what we get for reaction from the public.
Mike, what's your thought? You deal with permitting renewal or the world of it because in town hall. Right now we're talking about what we said 20 some odd properties.
So 17.
Okay.
The 17 and 10. No, I don't have a preference between 1 or 2 years. I think Bruce makes a good point. From the administration process, if we're doing it on an annual basis, it just puts an extra burden on my office to handle it. However, if this group wants to do 1 year versus 2, I'd support either choice. 2 years just gives us a little breathing room and maybe gets us to a point where also the other thing too is, let's say you have an operator that's just violating the regs.
Right.
They don't get a permit, regardless is 1 or 2 years. So at their renewal, at the stage of the renewal.
So
there's a technical point that I was going to raise later, because I thought we were actually up to, when we closed our last meeting, we were at item number 10 and, Roman numeral 10. And the strategy was going to be early in this meeting, take up 10 and 11 and sort of get initial comments and close that out. Then we were just going to go back to items that we individually or as a group thought needed a little more.
Yeah.
And so I was going to bring this up later, but now I forgot what I was going to say.
item 10.
Wait a second.
We just left the renewal process and you brought up, and it strikes item 10 in your mind where we left off.
Well, I had something I wanted to say about that, but well, let me stop there and find the point I was trying to make, and so we can come back to it.
So, Mike.
All right. So
wait, hold on 1 second. Hold on, Mike. Do you feel pretty confident that any offenders will be caught within? If we go to the 2 year, that would be my only caution of going to the 24 months with you not seeing an owner or an applicant.
We'll find out. Regardless if it's 1 or 2 years, we will find out if they're violating. If they're habitual violators, we'll find out whether it's us observing the violation or neighbors calling and saying, like, listen, kind of gets to like what Liz brought up earlier. They had 2 events this past summer. There were 10 people there. There were 12 people there. We will find out, and it will come out during the renewal process, whether it's 1 or 2 years. But so
go ahead, Bruce.
My point was going to be about using the tax filing, the sales tax documentation from the state as the documentation for the subsequent application for the renewal. They need to bring in, but if you come in at 12 months, it's quite possible you wouldn't have any documentation. There's a cycle to the way the taxes are filed and statements are issued, yada, yada. So on the one hand, my thought was to change our draft language to something more like, it needs to be reporting of the period that the license was in force. We don't want, and our language calls for the calendar year. I don't think that really works for us, but we could say, in effect, that the state document is reasonable basis, but we need information about a period of time. And however that's provided, or, we need a little more thought on that. But I didn't really link in my mind until moments ago that if we say that, that it's a 12-month period and then you have to get a renewal, that, we definitely going to have to do something with the way what documentation is adequate for the number of days that they rented their place. So if we said it was 2 years, they'd at least have, you'd think they would have some documentation back from the state, but I don't know, maybe we should be accepting checks written to the state of Connecticut for purposes of paying them, copies of the checks or something, and not hang it on something coming back from the state. But I don't know.
If we change the wording in 5B, Section 2, number 4, it says copy of sales tax receipts from previous calendar year. Change that to copies of sales tax receipts from the previous rental period.
And that would cover that.
That would cover that 2-year permit period.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
And I was thinking, my concern was 12 versus 24. The 12 was being able to address non-compliant owners, but balancing that with 2 points Bruce says, maybe there's just not enough, maybe you don't have enough activity to measure it, number one, and number two, the burden on town staff. But when I think about my first concern, which was addressing non-compliance, at the end, a person who's not compliant during the period falls into the enforcement, and their permit, to be clear, their permit can be pulled prior to the renewal period. So I think that kind of gets me more comfortable with going for the longer term.
Can I raise a point too on this? I think that we should look at it from both sides. And that we also like to be, landlord friendly on this by not making it so burdensome on their end, encourage doing this, for the tourism and whatever other economic activity it could bring. And also some people may want to do this. They start to do it. Maybe they don't get momentum for a while. So they start their permit at a weird time of the year where it's low. They may actually not really get any juice for the first year. So that's just my thought about waiting 2 years.
So for Tom trying to wordsmith this, though, maybe it's something more along the lines of the documentation of the days rented. Accurate documentation needs to the satisfaction of the director of planning. Adequate documentation needs to be provided for the days that the unit was rented during the previous period or the expiring 12-month period. So it leaves to Mike's discretion.
I would caution being vague on the wording for the director of planning's discretion, because what if down the road Mike isn't the planning director and a different planning director has a different discretion of documentation needed?
Fine. Well,
well, let's come up with let's put this as a side project. Tom, say the group is trying to determine the type of documentation needed to validate, prove the the commerce is taking place, whatever, and come up with, have Bobby or have somebody come up with what that material is, possibly relative to some other type of transactions that occur in town or in government that require permitting, something like that. Because none of us are experts in that, and we're just going to spin. So I think that's a good side project.
If you're going to rely on sales tax, you might want to look at how often they have to file, because the filings and payments are based upon the volume of sales that you do. If you have a very low volume, you may only be filing once a year. I know it goes to monthly, quarterly, even for pretty high dollar amounts.
The thing was, Ron, we're not trying to monitor their status as taxpayers. We're just trying to get some documentation of the number of days the place was rented out. Yeah, we cap it at 100.
You should be. They may only file once a year. So,
right.
Okay, so we'll get. So for B, so for 5B2, or that's a 2, you'll, Tom, figure out applicants' copies of something, whatever to prove. I don't know what it is. So 5B24, whatever that is.
Could I ask just a moment on that with regards to, this is Henry.
Oh, Henry.
Just a moment on that with regard, I have to disagree with Tom a little bit. No matter who is the planning director, and I would agree with Liz with regards to making it a little bit more flexible, is a little bit more pro-business. Most of this is going to be kind of on its own, and we won't have problems with the rentals. There'll be a number of them that will just go along their way. Essentially, you had brought up the point, you want to have teeth in it so that when you have the ability, when you need to enforce it, then you have something, an ability to enforce it. that discretion will give you, I think, a little bit of flexibility on that. If it becomes a problem where you're not getting it, you revisit the regulation. So to make it onerous right off the bat because of things that might happen, I think is kind of, I would take the approach that you would make it more incrementally more difficult as you see more and more problems arise to address those problems, rather than trying to address problems that really are isolated right now. The discretion portion of it gives you a little bit more flexibility, a little bit easier to handle. Most of the people will be one-offs, two-offs. People who do constant will have better documentation for their own purposes. And people who just rent their rooms maybe twice a year, they're really not going to have great documentation other than I rented it July 4th and the day before Christmas. And to have them do a lot of work basically says you're setting the bar a little bit higher, and they're just, okay, it's just not worth it. So you may kind of push those people out of the market per se. But that's my 2 cents, is that I think that the flexibility for the planning director, whoever it is probably a good thing to do. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Henry. I agree.
Henry, just my additional comment, not my counter to that. My additional comment is that when I think about what we're doing globally here and sort of how we got here, remember, we're not, my edict was not to legislate to one particular problem. My thought process is, though, I don't know what that documentation should be, because I'm not an expert, and I'm trying to balance I'm trying to be as pro-business as possible, but I'm also trying to put with the more, it's like the longer you put somebody, the theory, the longer you put somebody on hold on customer service, likely the longer they're either going to drop off and say forget it, or they're going to drive through because they've got a real issue and they want to talk to you and they want to get their point solved. So it is, I hope, with a little bit of rigor, we truly put people in who want to be. I don't want to disincent people from. People say this is not a pro-business town, but I want people to be serious about being custodians of their property and custodians of the idea and custodians of their neighborhood. And so so there's got to be some. Again, maybe Tom, you guys can take it offline. I like the content you mentioned, Henry, about if it should be a little more latitude in discretion, up to the discretion. I can get comfortable with that because you work in this every day. But I do want to balance that with, even if it's just 2 rentals a year or 20, I want somebody to come in with something, because that means that this really means something to them, and they care about this ordinance, and they care about their responsibility to the town and their neighbors as to how to carry it forward. That's what I want to show our residents that we took some of the concerns of their concerns very serious, and we're the structures. I'll stop there. So Tom, if you can just maybe find some, working with the pros and town hall, what might be so it's 2 years. They were agreeing on 2 years, and then something around 0.4, something that helps validate the experience is from the owner. All right, is that fair enough, guys? Move off of that.
Fine.
All right. Jackie, good. All right.
Thanks, Henry.
Thanks, Henry. As well, yeah, for sure. So we're going to change. Does that go? So the expiration, that'll get updated, correct? That'll be 5A1, Tom?
Yep.
5A1 will go to 2 years.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. Okay. All right. Nothing else, I think, in there time frame wise looks fine. Whether it was 1 or 2 years, the 1 month, 3 month. Can we move on to 6? Knock that out.
Yep.
Okay. Any agreement there?
Sorry, I'm sorry. We say the renewal fee is 130. Do I miss where we say the initial fee is 130 somewhere above?
No, it's 200.
Two something.
I think that's on page 2. Yeah.
It's four. It's four. It's four.
A2.
A2.
New
I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep,
New application renewal 130. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. Any problem with section 6? It's the shortest one in here, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to say something about it. I don't have a problem with it, but here's my thought. I was going to raise this in an earlier section where we have that list of definitions. It's in paragraph Roman numeral 2. We have a list of definitions, and not included there is the title operator. And I know operator is mentioned right here, and there's at least one other space where operator is mentioned. And my thought was, we might add the word operator to our list of definitions, where this is one of the words that the state puts into their, unsuccessful draft document. The operator just simply encompasses a leasee or a subleasee. No, a lease, yeah. So, well, if the person who wants wants to operate a STR is not the owner, but someone who has an extended lease on the property, and the lease doesn't preclude it, then they want to be able to run an STR. And the same thing is true for a subleasee. And so, the state's off it to include a definition for operator, and that's just the scope of it. It just brings in leasee and subleasee as people who could apply for an STR. And I think, by again seeing the word operator here, it suggests, to eliminate some uncertainty about who's an operator is, what's our intention here. We might go back and make that adjustment to the list of, roles and things that we're defining, and just put in operator as another one.
If you're going to get into that, then you should look at the non-transferability, because that says a rental can't be transferred to another owner or operator. If you're contemplating you're going to have people other than owners getting these, just clearing up how you're.
So if I'm hearing you all correctly,
yeah,
there should be a non-transferability clause, but it should be shorter, and that says
could be
a short-term rental permit essentially can only be held by the current applicant, and if the property goes under a ownership transfer, a new application must. Is that where you're going with that, Ron and Bruce?
Yeah,
and get the word operator out of it.
You're mixing owner operator in the document. You just got to make a decision which one you're going to.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Maybe get rid of the term.
Yeah,
in this line, I'm just saying in this area, we remove the word operator in its entirety, so it's only the owner as it relates to transferability, because transferability, the owner is the ultimate custodian, who the person who's responsible for this whole experience and this whole the permit.
This may come up in a legal review. I think a lawyer would look at it, and he'd want to have very tight definitions on who's doing what, who they are, and how they're defined. And you don't change and talk about different entities as you go through. It's just tightening up the language.
Okay.
Or easy to fall off the track with different.
So am I correct then? Am I hearing that your preference is to get rid of the term operator from this statement here?
Well, from the whole document.
Yeah. However, if you're going to allow leasees to sublet short-term rentals, then you have to have some kind of definition there. Actually, we hadn't even thought that was an option here. But I'm not against it. But if you're going to do that, you have to address it. It should be addressed in the front end of the document, and then maybe you use operator all the way through. I don't know.
Okay, Tom, can you just put a note there to have Bob look at that then, the concept you follow what we're asking?
Yep, that is a point that Ron makes, that operator could be the term all the way through. And in the definition of operator, it could be expressed as
Owner or leaseholder.
title holder to the property, leaseholder, subleasee, whatever.
I don't know that I think that's a good point, but I'd like to move past this and ask for outside, because none of us are experts in how the document should cascade relative to interchangeable terminology.
Yeah.
Can I bring up one aspect of this? This actually takes care of something I've kind of complained about more than once, I think.
Go ahead.
I thought it was unfair that maybe the children of deceased parents wouldn't be able to rent out the family home, but this might cover that. Am I correct in seeing that if they're considered the operators?
Well, I think, no, if you look at right up front, they're saying this has to be legal residence. So I don't know how someone who inherited a property, unless it's their legal residence. I was something I was going to bring up later anyways. I'm still kind of the thought that it doesn't have to be the permanent or legal residence that an owner has a property. They should be able to have this option to do a short-term rental. But that's 2B makes that permanent.
Can I say that typically it's worded as owner or owner's agent. And then whoever has agency, and that's a legal term as well, is able to prosecute the documents and manage this. Because it's owner or owner's agent. We allow that in all permits. So that'll be your lawyer can do it. Anybody you give agency to.
Good point.
Fair enough. And that gets us closer to my concern around consistency amongst other processing platforms. Okay. And Liz, but if we look at this one, Liz's term is, it's a concern that she's had. The concept of we're losing for this number. So, we got two issues here. One is consistency and cascading through the document. We're going to take that aside as one. But two, going back to actually the intent, non-transferability. I think the issue, so we're going to keep that in there. But so even Liz, even if an owner passes and the property moves into the ownership of their children, the permit doesn't transfer with.
Yeah, but that's not my issue. The parents are alive, they're living, they're fine. The parents died. The kids are in Florida and Colorado. They'd like to keep the family home and would like to do short-term rentals. They own it. They don't live there. The parents never did short-term rentals. I feel like this comes up over and over again. I'm talking about the parents having rented it out before. No. It's about keeping the family home and maybe making some money while the family decides what to do with it or settles the estate or whatever things. I just feel like we're really not allowing that, which bothers me.
But aren't the kids owners? Because we have talked
they've
about
become owners, right? And we allow owners.
That's okay. That's occupant. That's a different term. The kids are owners. Okay. We did talk about this.
We talked about this.
I thought we said it was primary residence, though.
We did. But I think we took that out.
Okay, that was last meeting. I missed out.
Okay, so reread the definitions. Page 1, it says who owns a legal right to the property. And I know Mike's not on, and Tom, I can't see them, but it says and uses it as their legal resident.
Liz, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying you have said that it has to be the legal residence?
That's how we defined it.
Okay, so then in this case, it's not going to be the legal residence of the children who say inherited the house but don't live there.
It doesn't say primary residence. It says legal residence.
But okay, so you could have more than one residence, you're saying?
I'm just saying we did address this. It doesn't say that is their only. It doesn't say primary, I guess is what you had said.
Okay, whatever wording we use that would allow somebody who doesn't really live there but owns the house.
If you can pull up the document and then we can, no, but so you can read it before we, or when we send it to D.
Yeah, so you're saying on section 2?
Yep.
Yeah, I don't want to hold people up if you already went over this. I'm sorry last time.
That's okay.
All right. Well, so we'll just we can right, let's keep moving here. So we'll do we've got non-transferability. We know what you'd like to, Tom, you know what you'd like us to do. You know what we want you to do there. Excuse me. Thank you. I don't think we need to go through the general standards. These have already been established. We've already done that, and that we've already moved through that. Are we all correct with that?
Well, wait a minute. What's the general standards section?
Maximum occupancy. There's a 6 persons. You know, we hashed out adults versus not adults.
Yep, and we talked about
safety is the safety.
Here, wait a second though, Chris, on that point, my thought is that provision really should be about the lesser of 6 adults or the number of sleeping spaces that are permitted. The lesser of the 2.
Yeah.
That sounds feasible. That's feasible to me. Run that through Henry and Bob, please, Tom. That's a good point.
Is there a formula for number of bedrooms or something?
Yes.
2 people per bedroom plus 1 extra person, or however they do it.
I think it exists in our rental codes.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a square footage per.
Yep.
75 square feet per sleeper.
I believe it. Yeah, I believe it exists in the rental codes. So just be consistent with that. Then the safety, all of that needs to conform with. That's Henry. You looked at that's all our codes that we don't need to add anything more into there. Because that would be consistent with our other requirements for dwellings in town. This conduct it's consistent language with other codes.
Well, I guess when I was looking at that again, I'm thinking that where we're calling out, compliance with applicable codes. I think that we ought to consider whether our process, there's a burden to identify the applicable codes for the person who's applying for the permit and for the communication they're going to make to their tenants. What are the applicable codes? Our applicants are not going to be attorneys generally. And the people who, they're not even going to know what the codes are necessarily. So I don't want to belabor it, but my thought was we could do better by somehow identifying, by some terminology, which codes we're talking about. Applicable codes is not a very precise descriptor in my mind, but anyway.
That's fair.
I get that. Get that. And I'm not trying to put gotcha stuff in here, but at some point, Bruce, people have to check off saying, I understand that the town of Simsbury has certain codes and I'm willing to I need to understand them and I need to research them out. I mean, it's like when you buy a condominium. The condominium has the association has a 400-page document about, and you're saying, I understand the bylaws of this condominium association, everything that goes with it. We all live through this. So I don't know that we want to again, this kind of goes, I don't know if Tom has the capacity and his people or Mike, when a person walks in there and goes, okay, you're about to sign this. Do you know that code 745 is a stickler and it's over there in the big blue book on page 405. You better go read it. We can't get that granular, and people have to take accountability. They want to be involved.
What if the people are staying there asking what the codes are?
I think we could direct them.
All the codes are online.
Yep.
But included but not limited to.
Okay, if it was a living document, you could put links into the relevant codes. We have I don't know if we have that. It says code 7, and then you can click it and read code 7.
Those links break over time. That's
right.
Well,
okay.
So
my experience.
Any place that refers to a code, Thomas's work. Any place that refers to a code, you should put the reference code there. Then, so the person at least knows what the code number is, and it's up to them.
Yeah.
Can I add just a moment on that? Even the state building code says all applicable codes and ordinances. they don't attempt to list them because they can vary from district to district sometimes, zoning issues, health department issues. So that's the wording that they put into the state statutes for building and fire codes. So I think it's okay to just leave it broad and say applicable codes and standards.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bruce, I understand and I respect you. I understand the issue, and Liz, we want to be owner and resident friendly. We want to be commerce friendly. We want to be tourism friendly, all of that stuff. But I also want to make sure that the people that aren't all that friendly to those things, and that's not their primary concern, that they work to a higher standard so that they respect the fabric of our community and the neighborhoods we all live in and the seriousness of what we're expecting of people. That's, this is imperfect. So,
great. Well, I think that we could, Henry's perspective is valuable on this one too, that, hearing that, we could just leave it the way it is and see what feedback we get or what the experience of the enforcement officer is over time. And if it needs to be more specific, then we can.
Or does the town offer any booklets, a guide to short-term rental in Simsbury that might, I hate that, again, more work and also may not match up if something's changed in one and not the other, but is that something would ever be considered? That's
a committee you can chair and do that project yourself. I don't know. We've got that. There is, you're right. There are, I think, in other aspects, but I think we're legislating to such a small group right now. I can't see us doing that. But Henry, I think we go with your terminology, which would probably show consistency with other documents language that says all applicable, and we'll see if we have, again, this is the point of this is that we have I go back, remember, it's an ordinance. If we've screwed this up or it becomes so unworkable, or we see a place where there's a repetitive issue, event, or lack of communication or misstep or whatever, then we hone in on it and we reconvene and it's a living document and we make it more friendly or less or more, whichever it is. That's, I hope we don't get to that point, but that's why it's an ordinance and not it's still firm and still of consequence, but it allows for flexibility and to be revisited. So, okay. We're coming up on 3 minutes here. I hoped we would be able to knock out today everything, but I think some of us got a hard stop at 9. So I would ask that everybody look at, considering we're on section 9, enforcement. We're going to put this is an area again that I don't want to spend a lot of us trying to figure out what enforcement is. It should follow form with other ordinances to a certain extent. And it should also be something that is the area of responsibility of Bobby D and Chief Bolter to talk about enforcement as it relates to whomever is deemed the agents, other additional agents in town responsible for empowered with enforcement. All right. Is that fair enough, everyone? I don't want us spend a lot of time looking at enforcement because then we'll be, all right.
That's fine.
So Tom, you've got some notes to go away with, which I think there's a lot of value in just sort of cleaning up. I appreciate everybody's comments today. Do we have another meeting on the calendar, Jackie?
We don't at the moment. We're still a little unsure of guidance from the governor and state legislature about the virtual meeting executive order ending potentially on May 20th or being extended. Yep. So if we want to, we can have the next meeting before that date, kind of maybe around that. If Mondays work, maybe just next Monday morning. I can't guarantee that at that point, the town attorney would have had fully reviewed it, but we can kind of finish off a document that kind of say subject to his approval.
Yeah, I'm going to need more time. I hate this. I know, Jackie, you're like, you want to jump to the screen at me, but this week and next week is brutal. So something is happening. We know something is happening. We're not the only people concerned with May 20th. So there's either going to be an extension or there's going to be a solution.
Yep.
I don't think we need to worry about that. We don't need to rush to have the next meeting because of that date. Whether we have it in person or we have it in Zoom, it's still going to happen. So can I ask that people look at their calendar for...
Can you do the 24th, Chris? Because we have a Board of Selectmen meeting.
We have a board meeting that evening.
Yep.
I'd really like to prefer to have it on the 26th, 27th. Is any... I'm just doubled up with a lot of stuff the next 3 weeks.
I can do the 26th, 8 a.m.
How's it? Liz, Bruce, Ron?
Fine with me.
Yes. Bruce said yes.
Yes.
And we lost Ron.
I'm looking right now.
Okay.
You're saying the 26th or 27th morning meeting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. It's good.
Okay, so we'll set it for the morning of the 26th then. Is that what I heard?
Yes.
All right.
I mean,
Yep.
That'll give us enough notice period.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Okay. Just for fun, so they give us notice period, and that also give Bobby D some time, and because we did refer a number of things over to him for this meeting. Actually, it would be valid, it's valid enough to get enough of an update here to get this document updated with all his. And then, okay, so we got next steps, we got meeting dates, approval of the minutes, gonna get
The minutes were fine as submitted, in my opinion.
Okay.
So I would move that.
All
we
good?
accept them.
move the sec those. Anybody else? Second?
Second.
Great. Okay. The meeting's approved. Okay, folks. So we'll see you next on the morning of May 26th at 8 a.m. Thank you all for your time and assistance,
Okay.
and call this meeting adjourned. Thanks, folks.
Have a
Thank
good
you, guys.
morning. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye now. Thank you.